Let's start with something most people overlook because it feels too simple to matter, yet it changes everything. The difference between a compliment that's forgotten in seconds and one that lingers for days is specificity. Not exaggeration, not clever wording, not even confidence on its own. Specificity. And most men get this completely wrong. Think about it. You're beautiful. It sounds nice, it's socially acceptable, and it's easy to say. But it's also what she's heard 100 times before. From people who meant it, from people who didn't, and from people who barely noticed her beyond the surface. The brain categorizes that kind of compliment instantly. It goes into a familiar box, predictable, safe, and ultimately forgettable. Now contrast that with something precise, something that shows you're not just looking, you're actually seeing. Maybe it's the way her expression changes when she's about to challenge an idea. Maybe it's how she listens more than she speaks, but when she does speak, there's clarity and intention behind her words. When you point out something like that, something nuanced and real, you interrupt the pattern her mind is used to. And that interruption is powerful because here's what's really happening on a psychological level. When someone feels accurately seen, their mind assigns value to the person who saw them. Not because of manipulation, but because recognition is rare. We live in a world where people are constantly looked at, but rarely understood. So when you demonstrate that level of awareness, you separate yourself immediately, not by trying harder, but by paying attention differently. And attention, real attention, is one of the most attractive qualities a human being can have. Most people think attraction is built on what you say. It's not. It's built on what you notice. What you choose to focus on reveals your standards, your mindset, your depth. When your compliments are generic, it signals that your perception is generic. But when your words reflect detail, it tells her that your mind operates on a different level, that you're selective, observant, and present. And presence is where connection begins. But let's go deeper, because this isn't just about making someone feel good in the moment. Specific recognition does something else. It engages imagination. When you highlight a detail she didn't expect you to notice, her mind starts to fill in the gaps. She begins to wonder what else you see, what else you understand. That curiosity creates emotional movement, and emotional movement is what people remember. This is why less is often more. You don't need a long, elaborate compliment. In fact, the more you try to stack words, the more it can feel forced. A single, well-placed observation, delivered calmly, without needing validation, carries far more weight than a stream of empty praise. It feels grounded, it feels intentional, and most importantly, it feels real. Now, here's where many people make the mistake. They think specificity means overanalyzing or trying to be impressive. That's not it. This isn't about performing intelligence. It's about expressing awareness. There's a difference. One comes from ego, the other from presence. And people can feel that difference instantly. When you train yourself to notice the small things, the subtle shifts in tone, the unique ways someone expresses themselves, you're not just improving your ability to compliment. You're fundamentally changing how you relate to people. You move from surface level interaction to something deeper, more meaningful, more human, and that's what creates impact. Because at the end of the day, people don't remember the words you use. They remember how accurately those words reflected who they are. If you want your words to matter, don't try to say more, learn to see more. Now, once you begin to understand the power of truly seeing someone, the next layer becomes even more important. What exactly are you choosing to admire? Because most people stop at the surface. They notice what's obvious, what's easy, what requires no real engagement. And the problem with that is simple. Anything obvious is rarely impactful. A woman knows how she looks. She's been receiving feedback on her appearance for most of her life. Some of it positive, some of it not, but all of it repetitive. So when admiration stays at that level, even if it's well-intentioned, it doesn't create depth, it doesn't create connection, it simply reinforces what she already knows. But when you shift your focus from appearance to identity, something changes. Now you're no longer commenting on what is immediately visible. You're engaging with what is meaningful. And meaning is what the mind holds on to. Think about the difference between telling someone they're attractive and telling them you admire the way they carry themselves in difficult situations. One is external and fleeting. The other speaks to character, to internal structure, to something they've built over time. And when you acknowledge that, you're not just giving a compliment. You're validating a part of them that often goes unnoticed. This is where admiration becomes powerful. Not because it's grand or poetic, but because it's rare. Most people are not recognized for their resilience, their emotional intelligence, or the subtle ways they navigate the world. Those qualities don't demand attention. They reveal themselves quietly. And that's exactly why they matter so much when someone finally notices them. On a psychological level, this kind of recognition creates a different kind of response. It doesn't just feel good, it feels grounding. It creates a sense of being understood beyond the surface. And when someone feels understood, even in a small way, it lowers their guard. It builds trust, it opens the door to deeper connection. But there's another layer to this that most people miss. When you compliment someone's identity, their mindset, their perspective, the way they think, you're also shaping how they see themselves in that moment. You're reinforcing traits that they value but may not always hear acknowledged. And that reinforcement has power, it lingers, it echoes. Because people are constantly asking, often unconsciously, do others see me the way I hope to be seen? When your words answer that question with precision, it creates alignment. And alignment is emotionally compelling. Now, this doesn't mean you ignore appearance altogether. It means you don't rely on it as your foundation. Surface level compliments can be part of the interaction, but they should never be the core of it. The core should always be something deeper, something that reflects thought, awareness, and intention. And here's where it becomes even more interesting. When you consistently focus on depth, you differentiate yourself without trying to. You don't need to compete for attention because you're offering something most people aren't: genuine engagement with who she is, not just what she presents. This is not about saying the right thing. It's about valuing the right things. Because what you choose to admire reveals your own standards. It shows whether you're drawn to what's easy or what's meaningful, and people respond to that, often without even realizing why. When admiration is rooted in depth, it creates intrigue. It invites curiosity. It makes someone pause and think, that's different. And in that moment of difference, something begins to build, something that goes beyond words. So as you move forward, third, shift your lens. Don't ask yourself, what can I say that sounds good? Ask, what do I genuinely respect about this person that most people would overlook? That question alone will change the quality of your interactions. Because in the end, surface level praise gets attention, but depth earns fascination. Now, once you understand what to notice and what truly deserves admiration, the next layer most people completely overlook is how that message is delivered. Because even the most thoughtful, well-observed compliment can lose its impact if it's expressed in a way that feels predictable. And predictability in human psychology is the fastest path to emotional disengagement. What creates impact isn't just the content, it's the contrast. Most interactions operate on a kind of emotional autopilot. People either come in too strong, overloading their words with intensity, or they stay too neutral, saying something so casual it barely registers. In both cases, the brain doesn't have to work. And when the brain doesn't have to work, it doesn't remember. But when there's contrast, when something feels slightly unexpected in tone, pacing, or delivery, it creates what psychologists call a pattern interrupt. The mind pauses, it leans in, tries to make sense of what just happened, and in that moment of pause, attention deepens. Think about this in a practical way. If someone delivers a compliment with excessive enthusiasm, almost trying to convince you of something, it can feel overwhelming or even insincere. On the other hand, if it's delivered with no energy at all, it feels like an afterthought. But when it's calm, grounded, and intentional, when it carries weight without forcing it, it lands differently. It's the difference between noise and signal. Contrast is subtle, but it's powerful. It's saying something meaningful without making a performance out of it. It's allowing a compliment to exist without immediately trying to amplify it or seek a reaction. That restraint creates space, and in that space, the other person begins to engage emotionally on their own terms. This is where imagination starts to play a role. When everything is fully explained, fully expressed, there's nothing left to interpret. But when something is delivered with just enough depth and just enough restraint, the mind fills in the gaps. It starts to explore the meaning behind the words, the intention behind the tone, and that exploration is what creates a lasting impression. You have to understand, people don't just respond to what is said, they respond to what is implied. The unsaid often carries more weight than the said. So when your delivery allows for that subtle ambiguity, that slight openness, it invites curiosity instead of closing the loop. Now, this doesn't mean being vague or unclear. It means being precise without being excessive. It means trusting that what you've said is enough and allowing the moment to breathe instead of trying to control it. Another critical element here is emotional contrast within the interaction itself. If everything you say carries the same tone, the same rhythm, it blends together. But when there's variation, when a meaningful observation is delivered in a quieter, more grounded way compared to the rest of the conversation, it stands out. It signals importance without announcing it. And signaling importance without forcing it is a skill, because forced importance feels like pressure. Natural importance feels like truth. This is where most men go wrong. They try to make the compliment impactful by adding more intensity, more words, more emphasis. But impact doesn't come from adding, it comes from contrast. It comes from knowing when to hold back, when to slow down, when to let the moment carry itself. When you master this, nothing interesting happens. Your words start to feel different, not because they're dramatically different in content, but because they're delivered with a sense of control and awareness that most people lack. And that difference is felt immediately. People may not be able to articulate it, but they'll recognize it. They'll feel that there's something more intentional, more grounded, more real about the interaction, and that feeling is what lingers. So as you think about how you communicate, don't just focus on what you're saying. Pay attention to the space around your words, the timing, the tone, the restraint, because sometimes the most powerful part of what you say is what you choose not to say, and when you learn to use contrast effectively, you stop trying to be impressive and start becoming unforgettable. Now, once you understand how to notice deeply, what to admire, and how to deliver it with contrast, we arrive at something even more fundamental, something that either gives all of this power or quietly destroys it. And that is authenticity. Because here's the truth most people don't want to confront. You can say the right words with the right timing and the right tone and still fail completely if the intention behind those words isn't real. People are far more perceptive than we give them credit for. They may not consciously analyze every detail, but they feel the difference instantly. There's a kind of internal radar we all have. It picks up on congruence, on whether what's being said aligns with what's actually meant. And when there's a gap between the two, something feels off. This is where many men unknowingly sabotage themselves. They treat compliments like a strategy, like a tool to get a reaction, to create attraction, to move things forward. And the moment a compliment becomes transactional, it loses its depth. It stops being an expression and starts be. Like a tactic, that shift may be subtle, but its impact is immediate. Because intention carries energy, and energy communicates more than words ever could. When a compliment comes from a place of performance, trying to impress, trying to manipulate perception, it creates pressure. It feels like there's an expectation attached to it. And pressure, even in small amounts, causes resistance. The interaction becomes less about connection and more about evaluation. What does he want? Why is he saying this? That internal questioning pulls attention away from the moment and into analysis. But when a compliment is rooted in authenticity, something entirely different happens. There's no hidden agenda, no need for validation. It's simply a reflection of what you genuinely perceive. And that simplicity is powerful because it removes friction. It allows the other person to receive the words without needing to defend against them. Authenticity feels light, but it lands heavy. And here's where it gets deeper. Authenticity isn't just about honesty, it's about alignment. Your words, your tone, your body language, your timing, they all need to point in the same direction. When they do, the message becomes clear and grounded. There's no confusion, no mixed signals, and clarity creates trust. Trust, even in its earliest form, is what allows attraction to evolve into something more meaningful. Without it, everything stays surface level, no matter how clever or well delivered your words are. Now, let's address a common misconception. Some people believe that being authentic means saying whatever comes to mind without filter. That's not authenticity. That's lack of awareness. True authenticity is intentional. It's being aware of what you're expressing and why, without distorting it to achieve an outcome. It's the difference between speaking to connect and speaking to control. When you operate from that place, your compliments naturally become more grounded. You're not searching for the perfect line. You're simply articulating something real. And because it's real, it doesn't need to be exaggerated. It doesn't need to be dressed up. It stands on its own. This also means being comfortable with silence. Comfortable with not filling every moment with words, because when you're authentic, you don't feel the need to constantly prove yourself. You're not chasing approval. You're expressing active, and that shift changes everything. People are drawn to those who are at ease with themselves, not because it's flashy, but because it's rare. In a world where so many interactions are filtered, calculated, and curated, authenticity feels like a breath of fresh air. It's grounding, it's disarming, and it creates a kind of connection that can't be manufactured. So as you integrate everything we've talked about, specificity, depth, contrast, remember that none of it works without this foundation. Because technique without authenticity is empty. It might create a moment, but it won't create meaning. And meaning is what lasts. At the end of the day, the goal isn't to say something impressive, it's to say something true. Because when your words are real, they don't just reach someone's ears, they reach their instincts. And people may question what you say, but they rarely question what they feel. Now, once authenticity is in place, something else becomes possible, something subtle but incredibly powerful. And that is the creation of emotional safety. Because no matter how insightful your words are, no matter how well you deliver them, if the other person doesn't feel safe, their mind doesn't open. It closes. And when the mind closes, imagination shuts down. This is where many people misinterpret attraction. They think it's about intensity, about making a strong impression, about pushing emotional boundaries. But real connection doesn't come from pressure. It comes from permission. It comes from creating an environment where someone feels they can simply be without needing to defend, perform, or second guess your intentions. Emotional safety is not something you announce. It's something you signal. It's in the way you speak without urgency. It's in how you don't rush to escalate or extract a reaction. It's in the absence of judgment, the absence of neediness, the absence of hidden expectations. When those elements are removed, what's left is space. And that space is where comfort begins to grow. Now, here's the paradox. Comfort alone is not enough. If an interaction is only comfortable, it becomes neutral, predictable, even forgettable. But when comfort is paired with a subtle sense of intrigue, something much more compelling happens. The mind relaxes, but it also becomes curious. It starts to explore rather than retreat. This balance between ease and curiosity is what allows imagination to activate. Think about it this way. When someone feels pressured, their attention turns inward. They start monitoring themselves, analyzing what to say, how to respond, what you might expect. But when they feel safe, their attention moves outward. They become present. They engage. And in that state, your words have room to land, to resonate, to expand beyond the moment. This is why the way you give a compliment matters just as much as the compliment itself. If it feels loaded, if it carries an expectation of a certain reaction, it creates tension. Even if the words are positive, the underlying pressure makes them harder to receive. But when a compliment is offered freely without needing anything in return, it feels different. It feels lighter, more genuine, more open. And openness invites connection. There's also an element of respect embedded in emotional safety. You're not trying to take something. You're not trying to move things forward. You're allowing them to unfold how that distinction may seem small, but it changes the entire dynamic of an interaction. Because when someone feels respected on that level, they don't just hear your words, they trust them. And trust is what allows attraction to deepen into something more meaningful. Without it, everything remains surface level, no matter how engaging or clever they interact. Ion might seem. Now, let's go a layer deeper. Emotional safety doesn't mean being overly cautious or restrained. It doesn't mean avoiding boldness or expression. It means that even in boldness, there is grounding. Even in expression, there is awareness. You're not crossing boundaries, you recognizing them. You're not forcing a moment, you reading it. That awareness is what creates fluidity. It allows the interaction to feel natural rather than structured, organic rather than calculated. And people are incredibly responsive to that, even if they can't explain why. Because at a fundamental level, every human being is asking a simple question in every interaction. Can I relax here? Not just physically, but emotionally? Can I lower my guard, even slightly? Can I be present without feeling evaluated or pressured? When the answer to that question is yes, everything changes. Your words carry more weight, your presence feels more grounded. And the connection begins to build in a way that doesn't feel forced, it feels real. So as you think about everything we've discussed, don't just focus on what you're saying or how you're saying it. Pay attention to what your presence is allowing. Are you creating tension or are you creating space? Are you asking for something or are you offering something? Because in the end, the strongest connections aren't built on intensity, they're built on trust. And trust begins the moment someone feels safe enough to simply be themselves around you. Create that space and you won't need to chase attention. Attention will come to you. Now, when you bring all of this together, what you notice, what you value, how you deliver it, and the authenticity and safety behind it, there's one final element that determines whether your words truly land or quietly disappear, and that is timing. Because even the most insightful, well-crafted compliment can lose its impact if it arrives at the wrong moment. Timing is what transforms words from something that is simply heard into something that is felt. It's the difference between saying something meaningful and creating a moment that lingers. Most people treat communication as if it exists in isolation, as if you can drop a strong statement at any point and expect it to carry the same weight. But human interaction doesn't work like that. It has rhythm. It has flow. There are emotional currents moving beneath the surface, and when you align with them, your words feel natural, almost inevitable. When you ignore them, even the best intentions can feel out of place. Think about a conversation like music. If you play the right note at the wrong time, it doesn't matter how perfect that note is, it disrupts the entire composition. But when you hit that note at exactly the right moment, it resonates. It amplifies everything around it. It feels right even if no one can explain why. This is what timing does. It gives your words context. Now, how do you develop that sense of timing? It starts with presence, not just being physically there, but actually paying attention to the emotional tone of the interaction. Is the moment light and playful? Is it reflective? Is there tension, curiosity, ease? These subtle cues tell you when to speak, when to wait, and when to let silence do the work. Because silence, when used correctly, is not empty. It's powerful. It creates anticipation. It allows emotions to settle. It gives your words room to breathe. And when you speak after a moment of intentional pause, it naturally carries more weight. Another critical aspect of timing is restraint. Most people feel the urge to say something the moment they think of it. There's a kind of internal pressure to fill space, to keep the interaction moving. But not every thought needs to be expressed immediately. In fact, holding back just for a moment can make what you eventually say far more impactful. That pause signals control. It shows that you're not reacting impulsively, but responding deliberately. And that distinction, again, is felt more than it is analyzed. Delivery also plays a role here. The same words can create entirely different effects depending on how they're expressed. A rushed compliment feels like an afterthought. A forced one feels like an agenda. But when your tone is calm, your pacing is measured, and your presence is grounded, the message feels intentional. It feels like it belongs in that moment. And when something feels like it belongs, it's received more openly. Now, there's another layer to timing that often goes unnoticed. It's the ability to recognize when not to say anything at all. Not every moment needs to be filled with a compliment or observation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be present, to allow the interaction to unfold without trying to shape it. This restraint creates contrast. It makes the moments when you do speak stand out more. It prevents your words from blending into a constant stream of noise. And as we've discussed, it's contrast that creates memorability. Over time, as you become more aware of timing, something shifts. You stop thinking in terms of what should I say next and start tuning into what does this moment need? That shift moves you from performance to awareness, from effort to flow. And in that state, communication becomes less about trying to impress and more about creating experiences, small, subtle, meaningful experiences that stay with people long after the conversation ends. Because ultimately, people may forget the exact words you used, but they will remember how those words made them feel in that specific moment. They'll remember the timing, the tone, the presence, the way everything came together in a way that felt natural, yet somehow different. So as you move forward, don't just focus on having something to say, focus on when and how you say it. Learn to read the moment, learn to respect the rhythm, learn to trust silence as much as speech, because mastery in communication isn't about constant expression. It's about precise expression. And when your words arrive at the right moment, in the right way, with the right intention, they don't just pass through someone's mind, they stay.